April 10th, 2023 VCBB board meeting. We have board members present. We have Laura, Brian, and myself present. Dan is sent me a text saying he's going to be about a half an hour late, and Holly we're expecting in the next few minutes. So let's get we'll kick off and get started. Christine, do you want to just check in with staff present or do the roll call of staff that are present?
Yeah, we've got Kristen Bringus here. Rob is here. I see Tony Clithero. She's not yet member of staff here, but she's Tony, why don't you say a quick hello? She's going to join us in a. Tony is going to be our general counsel. Thank you for joining us, Tony.
Excellent. That's great.
And that was a surprise. I didn't expect her here, but I'm glad you're here, Tony. Thank you. We have Alyssa here. And I do not see, is Lucy here? I don't see Lucy yet.
I'm here.
Okay, all right. Oh no, I have to press C more. I see I miss a whole bunch. Okay, I think we got the whole staff here.
Okay, excellent. First order for business is to approve the agenda. I'll make a motion to approve the agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Discussion on the agenda. Only thing I'll raise is I didn't see minutes in the board packet, the March 13th minutes.
Huh.
So let's take that off. And I think the last meeting we had, we also had the same thing. We didn't have minutes approved. So we've got two past meetings to catch up on.
Yep, I apologize.
No worries. All right, so we'll take item 2 off. Is there any other revisions to the agenda?
Yeah, I just want to make it clear when we get into discussions, let's make sure, when we get general policy discussions, let's make sure we try to avoid having discussions about specific agreements with individual CUDs. I think we can have this general policy discussion without getting into specifics, because if we do get into specific, we might have to go into executive session.
Okay. Laura, you have a question? You're muted, Laura.
Yeah. I guess I will, when we get there, I may need more clarity on your request, Christine.
Yeah, well, it's simple. It's just a confidentiality thing, making sure we keep things confidential where necessary. But I'll remind you if we start going into that area where there's going to.
Okay. I think I thought I heard you talking about when we're talking about policy.
Yeah, we're going to have a general policy discussion, but there may be temptations to talk about specifics with individual CUDs. I would say try to avoid that because I don't think you need to. But anyway, it'll make sense.
Let's just, if we need to go into executive session on a particular item, we'll fact check it then. But at this point, if it's policy, that applies to everybody. Policy is completely public. That's a public item.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yep. Thank you.
Right. So with the removal of item 2 on the agenda, are there any other changes? And item 2 is just to remove approval of the March 13th minutes just because they're not in the board packet. All right. With that change, all in favor of the agenda with the removal of item 2, approval of March 13 minutes, please say aye.
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 Aye. Ayes have it. Are there any nays? All right, the ayes carry. All right, first item up on the agenda then is staff updates. And Christine, I'll turn that over to you to lead us through the staff updates.
Yeah, we'll have, Lucy and Rob will talk about some specifics regarding NTI discussions and CUDs. But I will say in general, we're working through a pretty extensive freedom of information request from the Wall Street Journal. We've been working with the attorney from the department on this, and I think it's clean. It's just with a lot of work for all of us. The Wall Street Journal is kind of doing a deep dive with many states, including North Carolina or South Carolina, Louisiana, and Alaska and Vermont have all been given records request related to the FCC challenge process.
Is it specific to the FCC challenge itself? Like,
Yes, it's FCC challenge and Cost Quest, which is the contractor for the FCC challenge.
okay, interesting.
The only, it's annoying, but it's part of our, it's part of our democracy. So I guess we.
So in your weekly update, you did say that was a laborious process.
Yes.
To that effect. Are you anticipating? How are you anticipating meeting the public records request if it's super time intensive and labor intensive?
Well, we're keeping track of our hours. We're
Okay.
not sure whether we're going to build them at this point, but we're keeping track of the hours. I think Alyssa's got the biggest lift here. So.
Okay.
And other than that, I'll turn it over to Rob to continue with the updates.
Sure. Nice to see everybody. Only a few updates. We're tracking several things on the legislative front. There is a change to allow the Secretary of State to issue certificates of good standing to the CUDs. It's more of a technical change that's required. There is also language that's being attached to the budget bill to provide for the escrow account that's necessary for the middle mile application. On the middle mile application, we haven't had any additional clarifying questions. We believe we should be in the programmatic review at this point. It's a straightforward proposal. We will keep you updated.
Okay. And then Lucy, why don't you talk about CUD progress plus what status of negotiations with the NTIA?
Sure, thanks. So CUD updates, the Lamoille, Northwest, and Otter Creek are continuing to work on their contract negotiations, and I think are making progress. But of course, that will be coming up once those negotiations are complete. Chittenden County has put out an RFP for support with contract solicitation and negotiation. So they are waiting for responses on that. And then in the packet next up in the agenda is CV Fiber's application for the remainder of their construction grant funds. And I think if it makes sense, Christine, maybe I'll save the NTIA part for the agenda item on BEAD and digital equity.
Okay, that works. Okay, and we're particularly proud of the work that Alyssa has been doing with Stone. She has an update to show you with the dashboard, and we're continuing to work on the KPIs, the key performance indicators. But go ahead, Alyssa.
All right. So just prefacing that this is our mock-up, but we've been working with NEK to get the mock-up ready. And so this is some background information more related to pre-construction activity, just so that we were able to actually talk a little bit more about what's happening with the pre-construction money and all of the planning work that's being done. And then there's also a tab that is showing the current miles that are being built. This is the distribution area that is currently being constructed. And there's actually 15 miles that are lit and 508 passings that are lit.
So you can expect to be able to drill down and see this with every CUD.
Excellent. It's fabulous. Let us let the minutes be noted that Holly has joined us. Welcome, Holly.
Great. Okay.
Any questions or any more on staff updates? Go ahead, Holly, and you're muted, Holly.
Yeah, sorry to be late. When you say passings lit, that in that context, does that mean how many premises are along the lit fiber. It doesn't mean how
Yes,
many
correct.
customers there are, right?
No, we're not putting how many customers yet.
That was a yet. We are planning on doing that.
You are planning on stating how many customers or which custom, I mean.
Not which, how many.
How many? Okay, thank you.
Yep, yep.
All right, any other questions on staff updates? Okay, hearing none, let's, anything else, Christine, on your end?
Nope, nothing else on our end.
All right, let's move to item 4 on the agenda, Vikuda update. So Rob Vitsky.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. So I just have a couple, as usual, quick updates, and I'll cover a bunch of stuff. And then if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. So first of all, we're very excited that Vikuda welcomed Chittenden as the 10th CUD to Vikuda. They signed and voted on joining the interlocal agreement that created Vikuda. So welcome to them. It's great to have them. Construction season obviously is about to start ramping up as the weather gets better and the roads get more drivable. So I expect you're going to see good progress on those dashboards through the summer. On shared service activities, I think we mentioned last time that we were going to do a survey across the CUDs about how they're implementing their financial systems. And we got very good initial response to that last week and have started going through that. And this is really kind of a precursor to how we're going to apply the resources from the Northern Borders grant that you all granted to us. And so good progress there in terms of getting the core data we need to decide kind of what the shared areas of interest are and where the CUDs want us to focus on shared financial services. We posted for a junior program manager, which will be greatly helpful in kind of facilitating a number of our working groups. We would strongly encourage you, if you know great Vermonters who would be a good fit for the mission and effort we're all working on, we'd love to have you refer their applications if they go to vikuda.org. The career posting section includes that job description. Make Ready, which we've talked to you about before. We continue to have conversations with the providers about this, and we kind of got a first formal readout in the last few weeks that some of the ideas we had about apportionment of costs and what's appropriate for ratepayers to pay versus CUDs to pay. We've got some more work to do. We didn't come to a meeting of the minds about how best to address that. And so we're putting together some legal advice around that and just kind of, doing some more background due diligence to make sure we're in a good position. I expect we're continuing to keep Christine briefed, and we will probably be bringing more information to you about that as we get to this next stage. Administrative activities, just a couple of quick ones. One, I think Vikuda's response to the auditor's report was similar to VCBB's. We found it very helpful and constructive, and really took it as a gift of feedback that we will look at and think about. We thought a lot of the observations about kind of the tensions between the bottom up and top down between the VCBB and the CUDs were, pretty insightful. Similarly, the trade-offs between speed and having every process in place were insightful, and we thought there's some things to learn from there. So the group has read that and is starting to think about responses. On two administrative items that we talked to you about back in December that we thought might require legislation. One was finding a way to allow the CUD employees to join the Vermont Municipal Employee Retirement System. And we've had a couple meetings with Secretary Pichek. He's been extremely helpful and his staff have been helpful. And in fact, we now have received a designation that the CUD employees can join without legislation. And so we're working through the process of figuring out which ones actually want to follow through on that. So that's nice progress. Similarly, from the Secretary of State, Secretary Hansis has been very helpful, has also met with us a couple times. And her staff have determined they do have the authority to issue these certificates of good standing or certificates of existence that help in federal grant applications, and that they have the authority to do that now. They are going through a refresh of their IT systems, and in fact, the drop-down boxes on the website that will allow you to just request one of the certificates on the website. So it'll be a little while before we have kind of the very simple compliance we need to go after those grants, but they've promised us they have the authority they need now, and that they will be happy to issue those manually when we need them. So that's great. They're working on an omnibus kind of corporations cleanup bill for next year, and they may clean up some of the language, but they didn't feel anything was necessary this year. I think the last thing was just to provide some input on the accountability discussion that you all are going to have in a little bit. So following the last board meeting, a couple conversations with Christine and Lucy, the CUDs, and an internal conversation last week. I think, you know, it would be fair to say that the thinking about how we can be more accountable across all the CUDs is developing. And that, you know, there's been kind of a real introspective period about what the core values and the mission of serving Vermont citizens, getting services to unserved locations and underserved locations, and, you know, protecting those interests not only this year, but for 20 years look like. And the answer to that is consistent with the state strategy let me back up. The answer to that is complicated. It's not the same for all CUDs. And I think as we've talked through this across the CUDs, everyone recognizes that. They also recognize, though, that, you know, the state strategy fundamentally is a community-based solution to a market problem, that we need protections to assure we don't get back into the same situation again. And so, you know, putting public and community interest first should always be our priority. Everyone agrees with that. That, you know, this entire construct is a bottoms-up construct, not a top-down. And so we have to have some flexibility to allow the local districts to implement local solutions. And along with that, you know, one of the tensions I'm not sure that we've talked a lot about with this group or even with the auditor is that, you know, that oversight responsibility in our mind is consistent with kind of the inherent fiduciary responsibility of the district boards. And so while certainly there are grant accountability standards that VCBB is responsible for, there's also just basic fiduciary responsibility of the municipalities in running their assets that provides another place where accountability can happen. At this point in time, the CUDs do not have a consistent single point in time uniform position on accountability. We had a lot of conversations about the word time and kind of how at any given moment during a negotiation, during implementation, during operations, you know, what's important to accountability changes. And that, you know, even in the negotiation stage, at any given moment, you have a contract construct you're working with your partner, and you could put accountability on that, or you could change the construct. You could say we're going to split this part off, or add this part, and you know, your approach for accountability changes. And so time is an important factor here, and recognizing the bottom-up nature of the CUD is important. We've had great conversations with Lucy and Christine about this. We'd like to continue them. You know, I don't know when we would come to a uniform agreement on every point, but I do think that there are some core values, again, around the bottom-up protections for citizens, and making sure that we don't get in the same market problem again in the future. There have to be some things we can say that will protect us against those over time. And so, you know, we are grateful for the conversation that has started. We don't quite think it's ready to conclude yet. So I think that's it for my comments, and thank you for having us today.
Okay, thank you very much, Rob. I see Laura has her hand up. Laura?
Yep, great. Thanks, Rob, for your comments on accountability. Looking forward to that discussion, of course. Really key to be working with all of you on the measures of that. The question I wanted to actually go to was maybe not, yeah, a bit of a question. I'm becoming more and more aware. Feel like I have been aware, becoming more and more aware of the need to act with some urgency on hardening our grid, our electric grid, and the work that our utilities are undertaking, and just wondering if how the conversations are going with the utilities. Certainly the work that you all are doing is also quite urgent. If there are any roles, of course, we have a lot of former utility folks here, which is helpful. But if there are any roles or assistance that is necessary to make sure that neither of those things are impeded, how are those conversations going?
Thank you. Well, so it's actually, as you would expect, fascinating and complicated. I think just to cut right to it, both the CUDs and a number of the electric utilities have major infrastructure projects that they need to invest in the next 5 to 10 years. And, for the CDs, of course, that is making space on the poles to accommodate fiber optic cable, to bring services to the very ends of the roads and all the unserved and underserved Vermonters out there. For the electric utilities, as we understand it, a lot of it is about grid resiliency, as you said, and particularly undergrounding a number of the rural routes that are subject to everything from trees to ice to just being in the middle of the field and being hard to service. And so I think, to your question, one of the conversations we've started, and it would be great if we could figure out a way to accelerate it and come to a shared outcome and benefit for the state, is how do you take the need of the utilities to move their lines out of fields and hard to service right of ways with lots of trees, et cetera, to the side of the road, underground, and make room for communications all at the same time? And how do you coordinate those projects? So I do think there's opportunity there. We haven't quite figured out exactly how to do that. And maybe it's something for, further discussion and review.
I mean, can you just speak to the nature of the conversations? Are they regular? Are they planned? Are they organized?
Yeah, no, I mean, there are a lot of power companies in the state. We've been focusing most of our conversations on some of the largest ones. And so, joining the conversations with all of them is one aspect that we haven't done yet. The second piece, I think, of that is that, we've been so far very much focused on the make-ready aspects and accelerating deployment of broadband. What we're hearing in those conversations is that they have all these other, projects that they're also working on. So we really have just started that conversation, Laura. And like I said, I think we both recognize it would be great to join those conversations and figure out if there's a mutual benefit. And we just haven't put the resources into doing that yet.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Rob. I certainly am interested in what tools, resources, assistance can be brought to bear all the way around.
Great.
In kind of meeting those dual urgent goals.
I think we would welcome that. So that's great.
Yeah. Christine, are you engaging? Is the VCBB engaging in that in any way, or is this largely a VCUDA?
Yes, we've been fully engaged with
Okay.
specifically Rob and I and Lucy have been having extensive discussions on this. And we're actually, we're here to support the CUDs in that discussion. We talked about a strategy on how to move forward.
Great. Okay. Thanks. I would really like us to make sure that we continue to surface this issue regularly in our agenda meetings, understanding kind of really the urgency, the the human resource constraints, et cetera. So. just
Yeah, I think
understanding
it's
where we
safe to say between the CUDs, VCUDA and the VCBB, this is a top priority.
are. Great. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions of Rob? All right, well, no, I see Dan Nelson has joined us. Welcome, Dan. Hearing no other questions, going once, twice, sold. Let's move on now to CV Fiber Construction Grant Amendment.
Yeah,
Mr.
I'll,
you wanna tee us up?
sure. Lucy and I have had several meetings with CV Fiber to discuss their request. You know, one of the things that we explored first is a gap in funding. You know, we had anticipated early on, based on the NTIA commitments, that January 2024 we would get additional funding through BEAD. Because of that delay, now CV Fiber is going to see a gap in their funding, meaning their construction funds from their first construction application are going to run out. And we want to make sure this grant request is really focused on the next phase of the project, making sure they can be able to pre-purchase materials so that they have the materials when the construction funding comes in place, because some of these materials have 1 year long lead times. So just as we did pre-purchasing before, during pre-construction, we understood we're going to do pre-purchasing as part of the construction process. Additionally, there's funding here to keep their administration intact during the gap, and we've reviewed those numbers, and of course they're reasonable numbers. But at this point, I will turn it over to Janelle Smith, who is the executive director of CV Fiber, to talk about to provide more detail and answer questions from the board. Go ahead, Janelle.
Hi, thank you so much for this, Christine, and for meeting with us. So CV Fiber has been awarded over $17 million in grant funds, including over $12 million in construction and a material fund transfer, about 5.5. So what we're asking for here is, as Christine put it, we are looking at a funding gap that may take place as early as middle of this year, and we really need to keep going. So we've ordered some of the longest lead time materials, things that will take 45 weeks to get here, for materials that we really needed to put the order in now in order to receive them in time for our construction. In addition to that, as Christine mentioned, we are needing to keep our lights on, so to speak. The executive director, as well as our operations manager, and we're about to hire a community relations manager, as well as other administrative costs to keep going, to keep the design going. So the request. So we're requesting funds in order to proceed. The total amount, 1.9 or $1,910,845 is what we're requesting. And just to let you know what that's broken down to is where the OLT cabinets and electronics are $655, administrative functions are $518,750, design is $237,095, and make ready in $500,000. So that comes out to the total request amount of $1,910,845. And I can provide additional information if you want it.
Thank you, Janelle. Janelle, I had one question on the administrative cost. In the handout, it identified municipal advisory and underwriting services in preparation for access of funds from the bond market. The amount that was provided is listed as redacted, so I'm not going to say the amount, but I thought it was fairly large. But can you just expand on what activity is going to go on in that space?
Yeah. So could you? What is it that what is the amount, or what is the question, or the concern, or the line item that you're concerned about?
So you have specifically identified an amount of dollars for municipal advisory in underwriting
Yeah.
services.
So one of the things, and Ray Pelletier is here too, but we are going to have to go to the bond market. So I'll let Ray, he has his hand up. He's our finance committee chair, and he can elaborate on that more.
Thank you.
So Patty, thank you for the question. We're in the process of, Vicuda is in the process of entering into a financial services contract with PFM. And I've been involved with the negotiation of that contract, and that should come into fruition probably sometime in May. I don't want to presume what the Vicuda board is going to do, but in their municipal advisory services are not inexpensive. In addition to those services, there's a need for bond counsel. And so together you'll see that that dollar figure, if I can recall what that figure was 100 and some odd thousand. And that's where that money is going to be spent.
So thank you, Ray. I appreciate the a little bit more flesh on the bones on this one. Is this work that's going to be done through Vicuda with some shared services?
The Vicuda contract that we have is a contract under which the CUDs can also exercise contracts. It's a shared services kind of arrangement. And so that's just one of the services under the contract for CUDs.
Okay, so it is accessing a service through Vicuda. It is a shared service. Just it's still a pricey service. And I get it that the expertise that you are retaining for the bond market tends to be a pricey item. That said, are you planning for the year 2023 to, in addition to the grant dollars requested today, are you going to borrow funds to patch some of the holes you have in terms of funds between grant dollars being received and money you need, capital you need in the bank in hand to move forward?
The short answer is yes. We're uncertain with regard to when the BEAD funds will hit. There will be a grant cap, looking more and more like an abyss. But in any event, we'll hopefully get debt toward the end of this year, so we can continue construction and all the other things that we have to do, the warehousing, administration, et cetera. But we don't know how long this gap is going to be and when the bond issue might take place. So that's why we need this flexibility in the funding that we're requesting now.
Okay, thank you. Holly, you have your hand up?
I do. Hi, Janelle, and hi, Ray. I want to I'm running to catch up mentally with how this works. I'm sure that your original business plan called for a construction manager and an executive director and some of the other administrative expenses that are noted here. So you're not funding new activities, or are you? You're funding the gap in the funding.
Exactly. We're preparing the phase 2 work, some of the phase 2 work that will take place in 24. We have to be shovel ready when money does hit, whether it's BEAD money or debt. And so we have to make all kinds of, preparations in case it goes either way.
And you've been given advice that it's time to do bond counsel at this early stage?
Yes.
Absolutely. We have talked to underwriters, and we have talked to the municipal advisors. This isn't something you go into without a municipal advisor. And so, this is due diligence.
Yep.
And exercising fiduciary duties.
Last question. So because we're filling a gap here that you anticipated filling with BEAD money, does that mean your request for BEAD money will go down, or it's just deferred?
It's just deferred. And there's so many unknowns about BEAD money. Like the first 20% is for unserved, how the money is going to be distributed, what part of that we're going to get. We had all anticipated, I think all the CUDs anticipated going from ARPA grant to BEAD grant. And then debt, but now it looks like it's going to be ARPA and then debt. and then B, and then debt again.
Yeah. So Christine, this one's for you. You know, there's a contract with this CUD for the original grant. Has that contract been reviewed to ensure that this grantee is in compliance with its original grant? Can't hear you.
You're on mute.
Yes, we have done that work. Lucy, you want to say more about that? Do you have anything more to say about that?
Yeah, sorry, Holly, could you repeat the question?
Hi, Lucy. I'm just wanting to ensure that any criteria that are stated in the original grant have been reviewed for compliance before we make an expansion of that grant.
Yeah, I think that actually is more a Kristen question, but
Yeah,
I know
I
that.
was gonna say, Lucy, do you want me to take that?
Thank you. Sorry to
Yeah.
punt again.
Yeah, that's something that we look at when we do risk assessment, and I'm going through on a monthly basis and making sure we're up to date with grant reports and whatnot. So that's something that we do look at and make sure it's up to date. That's just part of the standard state process.
Thanks, thanks, Kristen. That means that is part of your analysis that so far as we know, based on the grant and the materials that you've received, this business plan is still sustainable with this grant request?
It does not,
check.
on my side of things, I don't go into that level of detail. I think that's something that our team as a whole definitely takes a look at as they're looking at that material. But in terms of my risk assessment and just making sure we're up to date, that's not really within the scope of my work.
Okay, Christine, that comes back to you then. Just checking. I think it's like a board member's duty just to make sure that before we give more funding, and I am in favor of this grant request, that we have, you know, are paving a way to a path that we still believe in.
Yeah, so you should know that what part of the meeting Lucy and I had was with Janelle and Ray to go over the financials. So we are paying close attention to that. We're actually, I'll say there's also two things we're doing structurally to even get better at that. Because I don't think I should be the one doing all the financials moving forward. But we have made an offer that's been accepted for a broadband project developer who will incorporate this part of the work. Friday, we met as a staff to talk about responsibilities. I guess Rob says we have not hired the person yet. Okay, I'm sorry, I misinterpreted that. Have we made an offer? Rob, would you speak up? What is the status on the broadband project developer? Would you please tell the board?
The status is we have a preferred candidate. That's all we can say at this moment.
Okay, so it's, yeah, all right. So anyway, that said, we also, Kristen has also now a member of our team reporting directly. And I want to be careful when I say that, because I will tell you that I think the DPS and the VCBB are working very closely. And I don't want to give anybody the impression our relationship is seamless with the PSD. So Kristen moving over here is more in the interest of Kristen and us, and not necessarily a reflection on any type of a division. I really feel like the PSD and the VCBB are working very closely together on this. But as part of this due diligence on financials, we envision, moving that responsibility from me to this broadband project developer, and I will work closely with that broadband project developer to understand, the financials and the responsibilities. Does that answer your question, Holly?
No, it doesn't. I'm sorry.
What was your question? Please repeat your question.
You referred it to Lucy, and Lucy referred it to Kristen, and then you talked about who you're hoping to hire. But my fundamental question is, who on your staff has reviewed the business plan of this?
I have. That's the answer.
Okay.
To be very clear. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, are you all set, Holly? Okay, let's go to Dan.
Yeah, just real quick, and I'm not sure it's a question as much as a comment, as we see this on a percentage basis, additional ask, is that a forecast of what other CUDs might be coming towards us on a percentage basis? So just to keep an eye out for that, how are we going to keep this going if we see the first one out of the gate with the highest level of maturity? I say that with all love, that as the others come along, what should we anticipate? Don't need to answer it now, but I think that should be in the team's windshield.
Yeah, just to let you know, we are meeting personally with all those CUDs in construction. We have met with them. We're reviewing the financials. We're having regular meetings on that. And, you know, we're paying close attention to this.
Yeah, I had a similar follow-up question, Christine, that, you know, just on the municipal advisory and the bond council, that if we amplify that number times 10, we're looking at, you know, $1 million plus of bond council assistance. And is there a way for us to cap that? Maybe not cap that number is the wrong word. Is there a way to manage that number in a way that's less to get us between funding grant, you know, between grant dollars to, you know, this funding gap where we have between different grant access? That's a large number. If you multiplied that by 10, that we're going to see some significant dollars peel off here. And I just trying to figure out a way to minimize that. Is that something Bakuda can help too?
Yeah, I'll ask Rob to talk a little more about maybe I'll have Lucy speak to that when she gets to it. I'll have Lucy speak to that. But the point is, there's some unknowns in the BEAD. When we get to the next agenda item, we'll be talking about a BEAD and NTI update along with the RFP. And there's some unknowns with the BEAD process that we're struggling with right now. And we've asked questions to the BEAD and the reason I'm giving you this long answer is BEAD may not even allow that, but it's not clear to us because BEAD is a competitive grant program, and we're trying to figure out how to incorporate a competitive grant program with the requirements of Act 71. There's a lot to that.
Let me be really black and white on it. Think about it in terms of what things can we do to improve access to shared services that all the CUDs are eventually going to need to minimize cost. So is there a way to take something like municipal bond services and council and make that a lesser number so we don't have to do that times 10?
Yes, that is the intent of the work we're doing with the NBRC grant. And would you like Rob to say more on that, or is that an adequate answer?
Yeah, I'd like to hear Rob's thoughts on this.
Go ahead, Rob Fish.
Sure, thank you. A few things. First of all the CUDs are at different places. Not all of them are going to be needing this bond council at this point. There's 3 CUDs that may be at the point of running out of grant funding before the BEAD funding becomes available. But just to note, it is competitive. It's a different process. The original idea and thought that the BEAD program would be a block grant to the state and it would follow the state's plan for universal service. It's a sad joke at this point, to be blunt. We're working our way around it. We are also encouraging the CUDs to be applying for funds from the Northern Borders Regional Commission. There's a new program that's just been issued and letters of intent are due on the 21st. And we would hope that many of the CUDs, especially any CUD that believes that there could be a gap, will be applying. There's other USDA funding. There also is the NBRC grant. There's an additional, I believe it's several $100,000 in funds where Bakuda can come back to us with a request for shared services. If this is a shared service that they would like that funding to be delegated towards, they should come back to us with that request. But these are issues where we're continuing to evaluate as we move forward and attempt to gain a better understanding of how the BEAD program is gonna roll out. Lucy will talk a lot more about that in her update. But that's the summary at this point.
Rob Vetsky, if you're still on the line, do you have any thoughts in terms of this shared service concept?
Sure. So just a quick comment, and Ray may actually have more insight. So the contract Ray was talking about was actually put out to bid for RFP before I got here, but it anticipated both a kind of shared statewide financial services package overview and then the plug-in of these individual CUD bond support things. And so we just started the conversation actually a couple weeks ago as we got the recommendation to move forward with the PFM format about how many people would be interested in that. And so, that survey I was talking about in the financial services working group about the status of where each CUD is and which services they would need plays right into this. So I think maybe we're not quite prepared for the conversation you all are having today, although we are skating towards where you are going in that, I think the contract is structured in a way that we could do a shared statewide analysis that would lower the cost on the individual bond service programs, et cetera. So if you asked us this question next month, I think we probably actually have more of a plan than we have today. But we're working on all the issues that lead to where you guys are going.
All right, that's great. I appreciate that.
Ray, anything? I mean, you were the king of this contract, so.
No, I think I think one should learn when it's appropriate time to just shut up.
Okay, any other questions? Holly, your hand is still up?
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Any other questions? I see Rob is clapping, Fish is clapping. All right, hearing no further questions, I'm going to put a motion on the table to approve CV Fiber's grant request of $1.910854. That's $1,910,845. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Is there further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Ayes carry. Congratulations.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's get back to my agenda. All right, that brings us to item 6 on our agenda, which is a status update on BEAD in digital equity RFP. Christine?
Yep, I'll turn this over to Lucy and Alyssa. Go ahead, Lucy. Take it away.
Thank you. So I have, as Christine said, a number of BEAD and digital equity items to update you on, but I'll start with the RFP because that's the kind of biggest item right now. So the RFP for a contractor to help with BEAD and digital equity closed on March 28th. We were extremely pleased with the quality of responses we got to it from it. We spent about a week reading through those responses, and the kind of team that's been reading and scoring and reviewing is myself, Alyssa, Christine. We asked for a volunteer from our digital equity core team, and got Julie Abrahamson from Dale, Department of Aging, Independent Living. Disability Aging and Independent Living. And then we also have Hunter Thompson from the PSD side, which is really important because of his kind of role in the telecom plan update. So we created a decision matrix. We each independently scored each of the responses on that matrix and then kind of combined the scores together. And it was very clear and very consensus based that there was kind of a top tier of responses. And so we are going forward this week with interviewing each of the top respondents, and hoping to just really bring this to completion as quickly as possible while still having a completely thorough process to make sure that we are contracting with the most qualified group that will help us move these plans forward. That is the RFP update. I have other bead and digital equity updates, but I think maybe first I'll see if there's, Holly, is that a hand about RFP?
No, no, sorry. I thought I put it down.
Any questions on questions or comments on the RFP selection process? Okay, other news from BEAD and digital equity planning. We have posted for a digital equity officer. That posting is open, which is a position, an additional position at BCBB, that was included in our digital equity planning grant funds. That position is open until April 23rd. And definitely the link is has been in your weekly updates, but happy to, reach out to any of us if you want the link, if you know of anyone who you think would be a good candidate. We're very much hoping to bring an all-star digital equity officer onto our team. In addition, we continue to kind of slowly but surely hear back about the challenges, the FCC mapping challenges that Vermont has submitted. So of 21,853 total challenges, we are now up to having heard back that 2,678 of them were upheld, and 15 were overturned. So as the responses continue to come in, it's just kind of really showing that massive lift of effort has been worthwhile and is starting to pay off. And then the final BEAD and digital equity update is really, and Christine started to speak about this earlier, but we really are running into a challenge with kind of the timeline and lack of clarity from the NTIA. We submitted a long list of questions to them in February. We received our very first of any answers on Friday, but it pretty much was answers, not really answers to the kind of core questions that we need in order to actually move forward with any of this work. It was a bit of answers to the more, the less kind of central or crucial questions, and the answers pretty closely reflected the NOFO rather than kind of adding particularly any additional clarity. So we're really at a point where we're trying to figure out the main kind of areas that we need additional information on are what requirements there will be around the match that applicants for BEAD money need to be providing that can, in theory, be ARPA money, but kind of just understanding how the timelines line up of when that ARPA money, if that ARPA money can have been already in that entity's hands or when it needs to get to them. Understanding more about the state challenge process to the maps in order to create the map that is used for BEAD, understanding more about the letter of credit, and understanding more about what criteria can be used as either gating and scoring criteria. So which criteria we can require that sub grantees for BEAD have to have versus criteria that we use to score applications. So we've been in contact with all of the members of our federal delegation, but particularly we've been speaking with Senator Sanders' office and just kind of expressing to that office the need for being able to move forward with our planning work, kind of in the absence of clarity from the NTIA, because it's becoming pretty clear that the timelines are not lining up and that we are not going to be receiving clarity from the NTIA on the timeline we need in order to move forward with our BEAD planning work, especially as we think about hopefully bringing on a contractor next week. So I realize that's long-winded. It's not particularly an action item of any kind for the board, but just to kind of bring you all into awareness of the challenges we're dealing with on that, and kind of our hope for just continuing to move forward and plan in the absence of clarity, since we don't feel like we can be at a complete standstill. And I think to some extent that in our understanding is, or our kind of guess is that to some extent, I think the NTIA is still developing their their guidance as well. Like, I think they don't necessarily have all of these decisions made. Christine, I'm finished. So why don't you
Yeah,
take it
I
back
just-
over, Christine?
right. Okay, thanks. I was just wanted to talk a little more about the board paying close attention to this. We will keep you updated weekly and monthly on this, but it is a critically important issue, and we're working very hard to try to get the BEAD program structured for Vermont in the way that reflects Act 71. And to summarize, the challenge is, of course, this program has not been designed. We are a unicorn, and we're trying to do the best we can to make it line up.
Okay, any other questions, comments? All right, hearing none. Back to the agenda here. All right, next item up on the agenda is policy item 7, policy discussion regarding CUD ownership and operating models.
Yes, and Lucy's going to take this one as well. And this is where I want to reiterate, we're trying to, you'll see that we put a chart. We have a chart in place that we put together, kind of a summary of how we've been approaching the different models so far. I don't think there's any necessary, I don't think it's necessary at all to get into the specifics of each CUD. We really want to have a policy discussion with the board for the general direction that we're headed. We have a number of at least three CUDs coming up that are going to be applying, but this is an important policy discussion. It's actually been on our parking lot for a while, I think since back in October or November, to talk about accountability. And this all ties together with what our discussion that ensues.
Go ahead, Holly.
I just want to note that the word accountability has been thrown around a lot in today's meeting. And I don't think that we have a uniform or a collective understanding of what you're referring to when you're talking about accountability. Because there's accountability for a lot of different things under Act 71, such as affordability. But I believe what you're referring to is being accountable for the expenditures of public funds so that they are deployed by whomever owns the network that is paid for in accordance with the objectives of Act 71. Is that a close approximation?
Yes, I suppose that's a close approximation. There's actually 5 places in Act 71 where accountability is called out. It's not specified what accountability is. So, that's what we're, yeah.
So then that would be a board decision to make a policy about what accountability means.
Yes, we could go there. That's not what today's discussion is intended to be, but that's what, yeah.
And can you tell me if my hand is lowered? Because I can't tell.
I can't figure out how to lower my hand either. I'm glad you're bringing that up. I'm trying to figure out how to lower my hand. I can't figure it out.
It's still up.
There I am. If you keep clicking on people whose hands are up, you can finally find yourself and click on the X.
Oh, that's funny. Must have had yeah.
Laura's hand is up.
Yeah, I can't tell if my hand's up or down. I can't see a lot of you all, unfortunately, because I minimized my window for a minute. As you know, I've got a lot of thoughts around the word accountability, having participated heavily in the drafting of this legislation. And, I can tell you, if you look to the findings in Act 71 and the discussion around Act 71, it was really, I think we heard Rob Vitsky referencing this pretty well earlier around the discussions that the CUDs are having. Accountability in so much that when public funds are expended, we have some guarantee of public service going forward, and accountability for being able to hold entities accountable for both the service and the public funds, i.e. never letting ourselves be in the position that we have found ourselves in, where we have Vermonters reliant on a deteriorating asset and no ability to do anything about it, and their ability to call for help being extremely jeopardized. So I wouldn't encourage us to start thinking wildly about what we think accountability is.
No, but it would be helpful if we documented it, made a scope, scored it, and actually, if we're going to spend a lot of time on it, really knew what the deliverables were.
Agreed. Thanks.
Okay, Lucy, I think you could take it away.
Perfect. Thank you, Christine. Does everyone have their board packet up? If I'm this is on page 7, I believe, of the board packet. Is it okay if yes, page 7 on the compiled PDF of the board packet. Is it okay if I kind of speak to it without sharing my screen, or would it be preferable if I share my screen?
Well, here's my question. On my packet, I have a chart about CUD contracts. A chart, is it the chart?
Yep, and then so it starts 2 pages before that. There's a section called notes, and then there's we pulled out everywhere in Act 71 that accountability is discussed. And then on the next page it gets into the CUD chart.
So just Christine and staff, just for future notice, when we get this board packet, you can see how it looks to us. Tagging the materials to the agenda is impossible. So please help us somehow by putting an agenda item at the top of the page or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's very fair feedback.
Yep,
Thank you,
I
Holly.
agree.
So okay, so I'll continue, and just let me know at some point if you feel like I need to share my screen. But yeah, just a few notes kind of before we start this discussion. As Christine queued it up, this was a discussion that the board has been asking for, but also that CUDs have been asking for as well, particularly CUDs who have not yet come to the board for funding and are hoping to be able to kind of know ahead of time that they're coming to the board with a proposal that meets the board's expectations. So as Christine said, I think we don't see a need necessarily to have this conversation in executive session. So as a public session conversation, we can talk kind of generally about how contracts are structured, but we won't talk about specific CUDs and their existing or possible future contracts. And then also kind of to note that, the intent, as staff sees it, the intent is in no way to modify or influence existing grant. We cannot influence existing grant agreements, and the intent is to kind of talk generally about accountability for Act 71, recognizing that future programs such as BEAD may have entirely different requirements, and also recognizing that we are not influencing existing grant agreements. So just to kind of say those pieces up front. And then to Holly's point earlier, it's true, accountability, kind of the reason why we're having this conversation is because accountability is mentioned many times in Act 71 as a value for public money, and it is not defined in Act 71. But there is kind of a clear relationship in Act 71 between this board and accountability. And I think, a hope that this board will be taking some time to think about what that means, what it means in different circumstances, and how to ensure accountability. There's one reference to, I think that the other piece of note is that, accountability and public ownership may be related and are not necessarily the same thing. And so that's a piece that's worth fleshing out. There's one reference in Act 71 to public assets in the intent section. It says the intent is directing public resources to the development of public broadband assets intended to provide universal service. And then the rest of the references are specifically to public accountability. And so, and then I included in the packet just the reminder of how in our broadband construction grant program development, we chose to kind of have the conventional and phased approaches, where conventional, where no payment is made until all of the build out is completed, and phased, where payments are made periodically in exchange for additional reporting requirements. And that was an attempt that was in response to the mandate from Act 71 that we develop standards for payment schedules that support the efficient and timely, or that reflect payment schedules that ensure maximum accountability. So that's why the conventional, this reimbursement at the very end is open to everybody. The reimbursement periodically along the course of a grant is only open to applicants constructing publicly owned infrastructure. So that's just kind of the reminder of why we're here, how we got here. The chart that Holly, you referenced, the chart in the board packet of CUD contract scenarios was VCBB staff's attempt to kind of think through and sort through some of the many possible contract scenarios between CUDs and private partners, recognizing that even amongst all of the CUDs here in Vermont, it's still just scratching the surface of the possible contract, the possible formats of contracts in other parts of the country. There's plenty of other examples of ways that partnerships have been structured between municipalities and private partners. But the intent of looking through this chart was basically to think about what are some of the different scenarios of how partnerships look, what are some of the circumstances in which that framework of a partnership makes sense, because it may be that there's, a preference towards having a fully publicly owned network if it's financially viable, and there may be situations in which it's not financially viable, and then that would maybe a situation in which a different structure might make more sense. So kind of looking at what are the different possible structures between CUDs and private partners, what are the circumstances in which those structures make sense? What would the board want to know in order to know that it's the right circumstance for that structure? And then within each structure, what are kind of the various ways to ensure public accountability within different structures? So I think mostly we agree with Rob Vitsky's comments earlier that we don't think this is something where there's an easy kind of policy answer, because we do think that it's kind of a work in progress, and that it requires a bit of a case by case analysis of each individual CUDs and the circumstances that they're facing. I think one of the reasons we do have 10 different CUDs in Vermont is because different areas of the state are facing different local circumstances. So we are not coming today with a recommendation for a policy, but we are kind of just hoping to hear the board's thoughts on this chart, on kind of the various models and the various forms of accountability in each one. And then I think just to close by saying, we have, as both Christine and Rob Vitsky mentioned, we have met with the CUDs. We spoke about this briefly at a VCUDA meeting, and then it was clear it was a much longer discussion. So we scheduled an additional meeting solely for the purpose of contract scenarios with the CUDs. And I think, as you may expect, there's a very wide range of opinions from different CUDs in very different circumstances. And I think that's good and healthy, and just reflects the different on the ground situations in different parts of our state. But I do think there may be some areas of consensus amongst the CUDs moving forward into the future, but we are not there at this point in time. Do you, Christine or Patty, do you want
Well,
me to,
I think
do you want to call on
Holly-
people, or do you want me
Yeah,
to?
Holly has, Holly, do you have a
Holly?
question?
I want Lucy to get to the end of her
Yep.
presentation, so that's more important.
I'm there, Holly. That's all I wanted to kind of just give you the background on where we're at and why we're coming to you with what was in your packet as opposed to with a draft policy.
Thank you. And thank you, Lucy, for the effort to catalog this information. So I'm addressing myself to my fellow directors. To put the job of what accountability looks like on the CUDs and perhaps on the CUDs and staff is maybe misplaced responsibility. Yes, there should be a recommendation from staff, but the fact that the CUDs view this issue of accountability differently is no great surprise. And we have to look at the fact that they aren't all the same, but the standards for accountability should be something that we as directors have a consensus on. And then the applicability of those standards can vary by CUD, but not the standards themselves. I also wanted to note that when the staff decides that we cannot change the standards for accountability or the requirements for the people who've already gotten grants, we've abdicated our responsibility to some degree because we didn't make those standards from the outset because we were in such a rush. We needed to get the money out there. And now we're being told, oh, it's too late. I think it's our job to go back and say, are we comfortable with accountability? And we just granted, just as an example, CV Fiber $2 million more. That's a great opportunity to talk about accountability. There's also the ongoing question of mergers and additional contracting for specific work. There's lots of decisions to come where accountability can be part of the equation. So I just hope that we as a board can use some parameters developed by staff to have a more robust discussion of accountability. Thank you.
Holly, do you have specific thoughts or items that you would want to put forward to help us walk through an accountability discussion? Maybe not today, but at our next meeting?
I can do that if asked, yes.
Because I think
And
that
I would of course want to connect with my colleague Laura Sibilia in that conversation.
I think that would help lead us forward on this. And, you know, and I do note that every grant that has been issued, it's not that it's been issued with a blank statement saying there's no accountability. There are state rules and requirements of each grant that do put some flesh on the bones of what's required. If we want to do anything outside of the state's rules, and what is it, appendix? There's some appendix reference, Christine. I'm blanking.
Well, I think just to continue what you're saying, we follow Administrative Bulletin 3.5, and you have discussed accountability. And this is what really triggered this important discussion, is because it's where do we draw the line? Because some of the upcoming requests, for example, if you're in Chittenden County, you're trying to only serve a small pocket. If we've shown you in the chart that we believe the highest level of accountability comes from a publicly owned network. But if we were trying to build a publicly owned network to serve a small pocket in Colchester, it would be very expensive. So we know these decisions, we're going to be facing this coming. and we want to make sure we have the accountability discussion before we get to the grant. That's what we're forward thinking here.
Absolutely. My point about the criteria should be set and then the situation or specifics should be applied.
So
I-
Holly, I would welcome to have you take a shot at giving us an outline of thoughts to lead us through next steps. And as you said, if you would like to consult with Laura, absolutely welcome that. But let's move the ball forward with this in some capacity. And I see Laura has her hand up and Dan does as well. So Laura, can you go first?
Yes, and this is a sincere question, Christine. I think this is the point in the conversation where we asked for no specifics. So I'm confused by your specific reference.
Well, I was saying generally, I know, I'm not talking about the Chittenden CUD. I know there's a pocket in Colchester of addresses, which would be very expensive to serve if we tried to build a dedicated fiber line to that pocket. So I'm not talking about particular CUD. I could pick any town in Vermont that's in a highly served area. I know there's, for example, right here in Burlington, now that I'm in Burlington, there's even a pocket in Burlington that's not served. So we can find these pockets in places. And if we're, the question is, where does universal service stop? Where does accountability stop? So I'm not referring to the Chittenden County CUD. I'm referring to a pocket in Colchester.
I'm not sure that that's.
Or I could say
clarity
or,
for me, but that's fine.
I could pick on the pocket in Burlington as well.
What are we talking accountability? We're talking universal service.
That's a great question.
Like that, yeah. So just even the chart, right, in the thing is apples and oranges, right? It's about 2 columns are about ownership model, and then the third and fourth are about contingencies of what happens when CUDs merge or extend. So like, I feel like the discussion's very disorganized. We're mixing concepts that makes it even harder to understand. So like, let's either get organized and have a productive discussion, or let's like not discuss.
So Brian, I think that actually really does get to the point of the core of what is meant by accountability. And I think that's the chart is kind of showing a lot of different metrics because there's not a clear answer from staff perspective to that. Like, I think we've heard accountability equated with public ownership. We've heard accountability equated with how do we know that every last address will actually be served like it said it will be, which is kind of the universal service piece. We've heard accountability equated with kind of more of the net neutrality consumer protection side of things. And so I think the chart was an attempt to kind of show how all of those different, and I have no attachment to this chart. It very well may be the worst way to display it, and I'm like, please provide guidance on a better method, just to be clear. But it's more just kind of saying, I think what you're saying actually drives home the challenge of talking about the word accountability when it clearly means really different things to different people.
Yeah. So I hate to take us back, but what was the source? What was the genesis of this as an agenda topic? Like,
so the most recent genesis, and there may be history from, there likely is history from even before I was a part of VCBB, but the most recent genesis was at last meeting, at the March meeting. Staff reported in our updates that we had received what we thought was rightfully so, a request from a CUD that has not yet applied for a construction grant, but is working on contract negotiations, a request that they that they have more clarity from the board as to how the board will be evaluating accountability, so that rather than coming forward with something that they don't know whether or not it will meet the board standards, that they can come forward with something and know with certainty that they've received clarity from the board and it will meet the board's standards. That's the genesis of it. It may be the discussion has evolved since then and that the board decides that the only way to go forward is on a case-by-case basis, but that's kind of why this is an agenda item today, or what brought it up most recently.
That's helpful, Lucy. Thank you for, I didn't remember that, but thank you. That does make sense. So I would go back to what Holly said earlier, which is, you know, we raced through things. We never took this on. Whatever the grant, whatever the construction or pre-construction grant, template is that we hand out is our best stab at having whatever our definition of accountability is in it. And if that's not sufficient, we should go revisit that. But that's the place where it should live, right?
That's like putting it up front in the definition. But since there appears to be no definition, Brian, I'm leery about this. And it's not that I have an answer. It's that I want to ensure we have a process. Yeah, I do want to, just in the history of this question, there was a CUD who came forward with a commercial operator in tow, and the commercial operator was going to build out the district, and there was huge conversation about how that CUD would hold the commercial operator accountable. There's lots of accountability conversations here, and there may be a different accountability standard for every form of operation.
Yeah.
I can say that people assume that a publicly owned system is the most accountable, and I would really question that assumption.
I
Hugely.
totally agree with you. 100% agree with you, Holly.
Yeah, Dan has his hands up, so.
I just wanted to make a comment. Sorry, Patty, is that okay?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Laura, were you done with your questions? Okay, go to Dan then. Thank you.
All right. I just wanted to make a comment that when we talk about accountability, it really boils down to, in my mind, putting proper governance and policy and measures and controls. And if we just break it up into those categories of how we do things and then how we monitor it, the measures and controls are going to be important. I don't think it's any more complicated than that, but we have rushed and we're here now. And so, Holly, if you're taking that on, I don't know how we can support you, but.
One of the things I would be inclined to do is I have I think there's only 4 grant agreements that have actually been issued, but I'd love staff's correction on that. And the real question will be whether there's measures in those grant agreements that are monitorable and reportable. And Kristen has been working on this. So categorically, there are some controls in place, but we do talk about things like the sustainability of the business, and we never address the question of affordability and what the retail pricing is going to be like. So there's such a range of criteria that we could be talking about. We should probably tap what ones roll up to our notion of affordability. I'm sorry, our notion of accountability, and just ensure we're doing those well.
Okay, well, there's work in front of us. Thanks, Patty.
Okay, so next steps on this, Holly, you're going to flush in basically an outline or something to help start us and tee this up for the next meeting.
Yeah, I don't know that I can make like a really I don't know that I can take all the work that's the CUDs and staff have been pulling together and illuminated, and I don't know, I don't have any magic. So I think I'd make some recommendations, and my goal is to try to have something for you that pushes the ball forward. Lucy, thank you for pushing the ball forward. And I promise to stop in with Laura Sibilia pre-meeting to talk about that. How's that for
That sounds fabulous. Like you said, one
Hey.
step at a time here.
Yeah, thank you, Patty. Patty, I think one more piece I just want to say, because I know that the CUDs will be asking about this, is I think the hope from the CUDs, my understanding from my conversations, would be that this would not be something that would need to be brought fully to resolution prior to receiving another application from a CUD. I think the feeling would be that that would be putting the CUDs who have not yet applied in kind of a different category than all the CUDs that have applied. And so I think, I think initially there was a hope that this would be brought to completion at this meeting, which I think there's kind of a clear understanding that that is amongst everybody, that that is not what will be happening, and nor should it be, because we aren't there yet. But I think just to see if the board agrees, to make it perfectly clear that we would not be kind of putting a hold on CUD applications in the meantime. Does that make sense? And does that reflect what the board feels?
I don't see this process holding up CUDs. We're going to work in tandem, side by side.
Yeah, and so I don't know that this will be the case. I have not heard of CUDs specifically wanting to come forward in May, but for example, like if a CUD did want to come forward in May with a construction agreement, that they would still be empowered to, even if this discussion will be continued at the next board meeting.
Yeah, I think they should continue with their plans. Anybody who needs to come in with a grant application, they continue with those plans as they need to.
Perfect.
Laura, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point that Lucy's making. There are folks on the runway looking for some information from us. I think they've probably heard some, varying levels of concern, opposition to repeating some of our decisions that we've made before. So not sure how.
Actually, Laura, I think the goal is that they want to have the opportunity to have the same decisions that we've made before.
Probably,
so
yeah.
That's and the question is, how can we build accountability into those paradigms? So okay, enough for me, certainly.
Okay, so are we all set? Can we move along?
Yeah, thank you for that discussion.
All right. Let's move to item 8, which is discussion of the report from the auditor's office. Christine, will you tee us up?
Yeah, we were, as we've reported, we've been working closely with the auditor's office. I actually reached out to the auditor's office more than a year ago, because this is such a large infrastructure project. It makes it logical that the auditor would be paying attention. We received the report. It's we've pretty well received it. We asked to testify at the Senate Finance, and pretty well received there. I think it's safe to say we're pretty much in line with the report, and and we appreciate the feedback. I'm not sure. I guess at this point, I would answer any questions that the board might have about what was included in your packet. But I can take item by item as well, but I would just suggest I answer questions as they come up.
All right, I see Holly's hand is up.
I was hoping somebody else would raise their hand and I could defer to them first. Okay, here's what I hear that I want to diffuse. That we're all in agreement with the auditor's report sounds very cheery, and the Senate Finance Committee is very happy to hear that we're working hard, and that's all great. The auditor's report stated particular items that we need
Oh,
to
I didn't,
work on.
if I gave you the impression that we're all in agreement, that's not the case. We're generally in agreement, is what I said.
Well, agreement or not agreement is not really material to me. What's material to me is what are the criteria in the auditor's report that the directors of the BCBB board want to have staff develop an action plan for. And I think that's the criteria that we should look at the auditor's report with, is what is the work that the auditor wants us to do, and what of this work are we assigning to staff? And one, of course, I'm always interested in affordability. And, the auditor was very clear with the Senate Finance Committee that affordability is not on the radar screen at the BCBB. It's not in the grant agreements. It's really very vaguely referred to, and references, by the way, of money, public money buying down the retail rate will not make the auditor happy, and is not, I don't think we've heard any justification for those kind of comments. So I'm hoping, Patty, that we can maybe defer the completion of this discussion to a next meeting also, not necessarily the next meeting, but maybe the next meeting, and go through and pick out which of these items are important to the board directors for ensuring that we are not treating this as a really ensuring that we are working on these items, because it's kind of a gift to have somebody, a third party observer, come in and look at our work and say, okay, here's areas where you could do more.
Yeah, I really appreciate the way you've teed this up, Holly, and the key phrase I think is an action plan. I think rather than and Christine, I know you included in here a response.
Can I hear from the rest of the board members as well on this? Yeah.
I know you included, let me finish. You included a response in our board packet, but I think really there needs to be a fully vetted action plan. We're not going to snap our fingers and make everything happen tomorrow, but there's some great suggestions in here of things that we need to do that I think needs to be codified and put a plan together that over the next whatever time frame, year, 2 years, we are going to do X, Y, and Z to address these issues. I think it really lays a blueprint for us to proceed forward.
We don't agree with all those issues. So let's start with that. So don't say all the issues. But I would like to hear from the rest of the board, please.
Understood, Christine. And what issues we do address. We may have some differences of what you think is critical and what we may think is critical as board members, but I think that this document necessitates further tangible work from us.
I think the document is the work we are doing. So please, let's let some other board members speak up.
And I just urge you, don't take this as a defensive thing.
I'm not. I'm just saying that it's
take this as defensive. It's laying the plan for work ahead. Time out. But with that, let's hear from Brian and Dan and Laura. Go ahead, Brian.
So I guess one, Christine, I don't know why this is evoking like antagonistic tone out of you. So it's not helpful to the discussion. It makes me uncomfortable and I don't get it. So I like.
Well, I just think you're, all right.
So my first question, and Patty, I'm going to ask you. So the VCBB response to report from state auditor that starts on page 23, did that go out? Has that been sent back to the auditor?
That's a question for Christine.
Sorry, Christine?
We've responded to the auditor, yes, not in this is specifically been written for you, but I don't know.
But this went out to the auditor as a response from the VCBB.
Well, it went to the Senate Finance and the auditor was there. at the Senate Finance Committee meeting. The auditor, we were at Senate Finance with the auditor, and we're all in agreement with these responses. We
Who's
sent
we?
it,
Who's we?
the auditor, Doug Hoffer, Senate Finance, and staff.
Okay, so I just speaking only on my behalf as a member of the VCBB, like I didn't see any of these responses before they went out. And so I don't, like, this doesn't represent me at all. It might. I haven't read it. I mean, I read it in the packet, but it was already gone by then. So I guess I'm uncomfortable with a response to a formal state process that represents the view of the VCBB when the VCBB actually hasn't had any discussion on it. That feels
Okay,
really weird to me.
all right, I will take that under notice. Maybe we should have had a special meeting before we went to.
Maybe. So you're
Yeah.
doing this thing, which I've noticed you do in the past, where you say, I'll take that under advisement, which basically means I'm going to hear the words, but I'm not going to do anything about it. And that, like, I'm done with that. I'm done with that. So I don't know what the proper thing is. I don't want to create waves unnecessarily, but in my view, you should retract this because, or you should amend it to say, this is the VCBB staff response.
Yeah.
All right,
Right?
well, yeah, that could be done.
Because this does not represent my input. I don't think it represents Dan's or Laura's or Holly's or Patty's. So I don't know what this is.
It is staff.
mislabeled.
Yeah, Brian, it is a staff response.
It's not what it says though, Patty, right?
Agreed, but it is, I think the change should be, it's the VCBB staff response to the report.
Okay, so then my question is, as board members, on something is, seemingly, with the optics on it that the state auditor's report would have, should that have been done from the staff standpoint, or should the board members have been involved in it? So this just feels, again, this just like, oh.
Well, understand it was it.
Stop.
Well, I want to respond to you. I think you're misconstruing this.
Well, so then what is it? Is this thing important, or is this just like is this just a routine checkbox state process? If it is, then I guess I could be fine. I still don't want my name associated with something I haven't seen or had given an opportunity to provide input to. If this is more than that, then I think you're completely understating it and underplaying it.
All right, can I respond? Let me know when I can respond. Okay, this has been an interactive back and forth with the auditor all along. So it's not like this was a point in time response. We were asked by the Senate committee to prepare some materials ahead of time, which we did. But what you're seeing is actually a culmination of a back and forth with the auditor's office.
Okay. But what I'm seeing is the VCBB response to report from state auditor office.
Yeah, it should be staff.
So it's horribly mislabeled, right? And so if this is just a back and forth between staff and the state auditor's office, and we just have a labeling problem, like, I still don't feel good about it, but I feel better about it. If that's not what we have, then I'm concerned. And again, I don't understand, even from the first syllable we started talking about this, Christine, you've been agitated, and I don't understand that agitation.
Well, I will be specific with I just don't want to react to one board member. That's my agitation. I hear Holly speak, no board members respond, and then we get action items. So I want to hear the will of the board. I've heard your will. Can I hear from other board members? So I'm just trying to work a good governance process. Good governance.
That ship sailed long ago.
All right. We did send out these responses to the board. We didn't get any responses
in the board packet.
Rob, I'm going to ask Rob to give the history, because we did send it out to you immediately. We kept you informed on this.
then please update me.
Rob,
Because I'm.
Rob, can you update the board on this? Yeah,
Very, very briefly, it was as soon as we got notice that the report was issued, we were expecting a 24-hour notice. We did not. But as soon as it was issued, it was immediately forwarded to the board and a text was sent to board members. There was not
But that's the auditor's report,
Yes.
Rob,
Yes.
but
Yes.
not the response document.
Yeah, that's right, Patty.
Yeah.
So we didn't see this till the packet.
I guess
Exactly.
just I'd chime in that in general, I agree with the conversation here. Holly, Brian, I'm sure Laura, I would like to be more involved in this part. I think it's warranted. I don't mean to, I don't think we should be defensive on this. It's an audit, an investigation, and should be treated as such. And we should have a prepared response to each of the bullets, each of the areas of concern. I think most of them are addressable. Some we may need to really dig into. And at that, I haven't, I'm sorry if I'm negligent on this, but I haven't reviewed this closely.
All right, Laura, can I hear your thoughts?
So just a couple of things. First of all, this is a report, not an investigation. There's a very important distinction between those two things. I think it's an incredibly important opportunity for the VCBB and the CUDs. I think that it is something that we should take extremely seriously, given our past history in Vermont, not our history, but the past history in Vermont. I do agree this is something that the board should definitely be a major part of. Patty, I would just note that I am receiving some concerned messages from some folks on here that maybe we need to table this discussion and have it be an agenda item for the next meeting. Or perhaps there's some executive session issues to work through here.
I mean, before we go into executive session or drop this this topic entirely, I just want to frame this as, Christine, I don't see anything wrong with the staff report. I do agree it should be listed as staff report in reaction to the report from the auditor's office. But I do think that the report itself gives us some fundamental structure of work we need to do. And to me, it is a beautiful outline of stuff we have to get done that we've all said, oh, we got to do that. We got to do that. And as you said in you were quoted in the report that we have been flying on the plane that we are building as we go. And that's exactly what we hit the ground running. And we have not put in policies and some certain things along the way. This report really gives us that impetus to pause and map out a plan. Like I said, we're not going to finish everything overnight, but we should identify an action plan of stuff we got to get done over the next year to 2 years. And this report, to me, is a great tool with which to get that in place. I think that's what you're hearing from all the board members, and I think there's consensus around.
All right, maybe you can, Kristen, I think Kristen is, maybe we could have Kristen speak up because she's been intimately involved with the auditor as well, so.
Before we go to Kristen, I want to hear more from Laura. Still, her hand is up, and then Holly, and then we'll go to Kristen.
Yeah, I would just say that I'm hearing a little bit more than that, Patty. I am hearing a little bit about making sure that the board and the staff are aligned around responses of this kind of importance and making sure that there's clear direction coming from the board around authorizing different types of reports. And again, these are all new. This is all still new. So this may be an important place to check in about when it is appropriate and when it is not appropriate to issue something without board authorization. So I'm hearing a little bit more than that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Holly?
I just want to make it really clear that I did not open this conversation criticizing anyone. In fact, I signed on and listened to the testimony with the auditor about this report and complimented staff on their presentation. What was done right is that staff made every effort to be collaborative with the state auditor and went to the Senate Finance Committee, holding hands and making statements in unison. I want to really reiterate that even though I have a spiky reputation, this was not to say that the auditor has correctly criticized staff. This is a gift from the auditor to help us agree on working points. And my sole goal was very well articulated by Patty in ensuring that the board sees these opportunities for milestones and measurements. Thanks.
Thank you, Holly.
Thank you. That is very well said. All right, Christine, now do you want to refer over to Kristen?
Yes, please, go ahead, Kristen.
So I just want to jump in here from an auditor's perspective and clarify a couple things just to kind of, tame this a little bit. So for starters, this was an investigative report. It was not an audit report, which means there was no response required from us to the auditor's office. So that's point number one. What you are seeing is that when we went to Senate Finance, and in order to make our presentation transparent, we had drafted talking points that we sent ahead of time to the committee so that they had something to see before we got there. So this was really not a formal response. And I mean, we can debate the title of it and all of that, but at the end of the day, this was not a formal response. This was not VCBB saying this is our response to these, risks that were identified. This was us saying we are coming into Senate Finance. This is what we want to talk about. This is our position on these things. And that's the perspective that we took on it. We very well could have just not even sent that list over. We could have just stuck to the verbal comments and left it at that. And maybe that's what we should have done. But I just want to kind of get back from the sense that this is a response, because this report did not require a response. It was really for informational purposes for us to improve upon our processes and to kind of like hone in on where some of the key risk areas are going forward. But it was not per se, something we actually had to respond to. So I just wanted to clarify that. And I don't know if that helps or hurts, but that's what the audit perspective is on it.
Okay, thank you. And I'll reiterate that from a board perspective, I'm very conscious of the fact that we have a role as a board to set policy and frame boundaries. We also don't want to slow down staff in implementing things that have to get done. So I'm not criticizing the report, that your response to the report. It should be VCBB staff. It's a VCBB staff report. That said, I think you're hearing from all the board members that we all feel that there's an outline that comes out of this that falls very naturally out of the auditor's report to help us frame some things that we all know we should be doing. And let's get at it, because I think this is a wonderful thing to respond to for us as a board, to put as policy and boundaries and guardrails around our process that we've all talked about in some degree or fashion over the last 2 years. And this just calls it out. I see this really as an outline for us to move ahead and put some framework together.
Yeah, and I will take it. I apologize that I said it came from the board. In the future, I'll be very careful about delineating between board and staff.
Thank you, Christine. And we all recognize that you have to run this organization and continue to make things happen. And we all recognize that. We don't want to impede progress. This VCBB response as a board, I think we all want to get our arms around it and use it as a tool to get organized. We need to, instead of running in crisis management, we need to start moving toward that more methodical, process driven. And this really helps us. It's a roadmap to help move us along. So I think this needs to be the auditor's report needs to be something that we are going to be working on in terms of creating an action plan, as I'm going to use Holly's words of that action plan. I think that's great to move forward the items we've identified in this report that we all think are important. And I'm happy to assign myself to take on the auditor's report and say, here's what I think as a board we should respond to. And we can vet that as a group. So I'm happy to take on this particular item for us to start, you know, I can call out and say, this is what I'm reading, and then we can use that to smush around and chew up.
Thank you, Patty.
You're welcome. Okay, anything else?
I think we still got 2 hands up, Laura and Holly.
Are those old hands, or you're all set? Okay. All right, so more to come on this for future meetings. Next on our agenda is public comment.
Yeah, do we have any? Yep, we see Anne has her hand up. Anne, go ahead.
And you can unmute yourself.
Sorry. When you develop your action plan based on the work that the auditors did, I hope that you will remember that what the legislature has created is a system where the work to implement the goals happens at the local level. The auditor's job is to review things that happen at the state level. And even as I finished reading the auditor's report, it was clear to me that the system's nature, the bottoms-up system nature of what has been created by the legislature was not really reflected in the auditor's report. It was aimed only at the work that was done by the entity that is part of the state agency, when in fact what we have here is a system that includes a huge municipal local presence. So I'm hoping that as you develop your action plans, you will keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. FX, you want to go ahead?
Thank you. So with respect to the auditor's report, I wanted to observe that the only thing I think it missed is the fact that the broadband business is competitive and unregulated, and that governments like CUDs are typically never in a situation where they own that kind of a business. So, you know, EC Fiber has pioneered the effort here in Vermont, and we have 8 years of experience as a municipality subject to all of Vermont's transparency law, yet we own a business that competes in the marketplace. And so, you know, we have a lot of experience with dealing with that balance. And I think that the auditor really missed a very key thing in terms of his analysis of what's going on. So when you do get around to reading that report, keep that in mind. I also wanted to say that it became something of a thing at that finance committee where they were talking about, what would happen if a CUD fails? What would happen if a CUD fails? Well, you know, because CUDs are creatures of the state, it's similar to what would happen if a water system or a sewer system began to have problems. The state would go to the court and a receiver would be appointed, and they would operate it for, you know, whatever the purpose was. In the case of FTTP networks, I'm not too concerned about that because what we're building, you know, has a lot of value. I mean, EC Fiber's got $64 million in debt, and we're probably worth 3 times that in the open market now. So there's that aspect to it. Another is that it's not what happens if the business of a CUD fails. What happens if the government of a CUD fails, right? What happens if delegates stop showing up at meetings because the network's all done and everything is operating, right? What happens if the CUDs don't put out a budget and an annual report in October? Okay, so there are issues about how these governments will continue to function as owners of businesses that are, important as well. So I just wanted to throw out a couple of thoughts because I haven't really seen them being discussed, and I'm glad I have had an opportunity to do that before a number of you on the board have actually dug in to read that report. And I'd be happy to talk one-on-one with any of you about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, FX. Anybody else have comments from the public? I'm not seeing any hands raised at this point. Going once? Going twice? Okay.
All right, public comment is closed. Let's move on to item 10 of our agenda, which is the parking lot. Christine?
Yeah. Well, I will share my screen. We had one item open. Actually, it's probably not worth sharing the screen, but I will tell you that it was really this policy discussion that was the open item. We put it on this agenda, and we have, you've talked about follow-up on how we're going to develop those policies in terms of accountability. That was the open item on the parking lot. We have another parking lot item, I believe, that we need to frame, which is Patty, you will work on forward and follow-up in terms of the audit report for a board position on the audit report.
Yes. Yep. So we'll add that. We'll add that as an action item on our parking lot.
Yep. So consider that done.
Okay.
Anything else?
Any other comments on the parking lot? Okay, hearing none. Holly has her hand up.
I may have missed this, but I wanted to confirm that Associate General Counsel or General Counsel has been hired and accepted and has a start date, which is very exciting. And I just wanted, it's not really a parking lot item, but I was looking forward to confirmation of that.
Yes, Tony is actually here in the meeting. Her official start date is the 24th, I believe. It is the 24th. But Tony, you want to give a brief introduction and say hello to the board? Yeah, you're on mute, Tony.
Got to do that at least once every meeting. Anyway, thanks so much for remembering me. I'm Tony Clitheroe. I have accepted the position as general counsel for the board, and I'm very excited about learning all the many complex issues and challenges that the board is facing, and helping navigate those with you.
Yeah, and we will, just to assure the board, I do want to make sure, and I'll look to, when Tony interviewed for the job, she recognizes essentially, we all report to the board. So ultimately, board relationships and building a very, I think we've got a good relationship, but anything we could do to continue to improve our relationship, we will work together and develop policies along that. So I looked at Tony to work closely with me in the development of those board policies.
Yes, looking forward to that. Thank
Welcome
you all.
aboard, Tony.
Thank you.
And rest assured, our relationship is strong. Despite, I apologize, Brian, for being maybe a little abrasive in that conversation, but this was a productive conversation and I appreciate it.
Great, thank you.
Okay, anything else? Okay, just to confirm, our next meeting is May 8th. So just make sure that's on your calendar. And with that, I'm going to make a motion that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you, everybody, and we will see you on May 8th.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.